Welcome to episode 33 of the Silver Savage podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Masada Tactical. Check out masadatactical.com for information about classes, seminars, and gear. This past week we heard about several shooting incidents and a lot of debate about possible new firearm regulations by the federal and some local governments. So we decided to sit and have an honest conversation about active assailants, civilian and law enforcement response options, and how do we believe these regulations factor in. Here's episode 33 discussing active shooter events with Steve and BK. Steven.
BK.
All right. I was just saying, I love how we start every podcast with that. I don't know why. I mean, I just saw you, 3 hours ago, 4 hours ago?
Yeah.
Good
And
freaking killer workout.
I apologize for my mood today, but I think you can, that's a whole nother podcast to talk about, mental health and stuff like that. But
yeah, we probably should have Serena again and see if there's any progress.
I'll put myself on the line. I don't care.
Right?
Well, I can tell you there is because I'm more open about it. So
there you go. I'm still not seeing a therapist.
You need to.
Well, we'll talk about that on that podcast. But in the meantime, yeah, you were in a mood, and we kind of forced you to work out with us, and that seemed to make a little bit of a difference. There's something about endorphins, dopamines.
Yep. Huge difference as the evening progressed. I was back on point. So
yeah, it's amazing how physiology affects psychology and vice versa. But we were discussing earlier. We actually discussed it yesterday about this podcast, and what prompted this discussion was some of the more recent shooting events. Right, we talked about the recent one in California, where 5 people were killed. And apparently that was the third one in California since the beginning of the year. And it seems to be an epidemic. I mean, we can certainly name it that when it's happening so frequently and all over the place. And I actually posted something in social media about this event and talking about police response and how that is lengthy and in a time sense, right? And both of us can talk to that in a minute. And how civilians have to take more responsibility for their own safety. Anything from prevention in advance to reaction when it happens. And I actually had one person respond and says, "So you thinking more guns is the solution?" I'm like, you know what? Yes. That's a short answer, right? And there's a lot of caveats to that, obviously, and we're going to talk about those because it's not just firearms or not quantity as much as quality and training, right?
And that's the thing. I think, and you would agree. Yeah, they might think that answer is very basic and brutish, but it's deeper than that. Because obviously, and we're going to get into it. You can't make guns disappear; they're going to be here.
Yeah, I read a statistic that America owns 42% of the world firearms. American civilians.
But here's the thing, BK. I think that statistic is misconstrued because that's documented legally, right? And we do know personally because we have friends in England and South Africa and different places like that. I guarantee you numbers in those places far surpass what we have here illegally. Because there's that debate, and we'll get into that.
But at least on the legal side, and honestly, I read a statistic, and then I saw somebody else comment on it, and I liked it. He goes, "Those are rookie numbers. We should own at least 75%." I thought that was funny. But let me start with this because I know once we decided we're gonna do this podcast, you did some research. Because we didn't want to just because both of us can get very emotional about this topic. We obviously are very opinionated, but we wanted to be a little more objective. So you got some numbers.
What's beautiful about our opinions, right? And I think our viewers appreciate this too. You and I are very similar, but we're also very different, right? You were born, raised in a country where you're surrounded by your enemies, right? So a firearm is a necessity, even in these smaller I don't want what you call them when they come up with different towns and settlements. Sorry, thank you. I was having a moment. But even then, the citizens have to arm themselves to protect them. So you have a different appreciation. There's a different healthy appreciation for firearms.
And we can talk about that in a second because actually Israel is very restrictive.
Yes, and I learned that in my statistics that Israel is one of the top nations with extremely restrictive firearms. I mean, you can only possess one. You have to be of a certain age, pass aptitude tests. you knowing me and the affinity I have for Israel and everything Israeli and the military, I was actually shockingly surprised at how strict Israeli gun control laws are, because that's something I want to differentiate in our conversation: gun laws and gun control laws, because I think everything gets misconstrued. But yes,
So
so
sorry, just to not to interrupt you, but to talk about it real briefly, because I don't want this conversation being about Israel, because it really is comparing apples and oranges, right?
oh,
Um,
absolutely.
you're correct. We're surrounded by enemies. We have a big issue with terrorism. On the flip side, crime is almost non-existent. It's very low, right? Um, Civilian gun ownership is very restricted. That said, you have a vast population of military personnel who do carry their firearms home. They take it with them on weekends when they're on leave, every evening. So the amount of firearms actually out there is very large. We just don't issue concealed carry licenses as
And here's the
frequent.
thing: the law enforcement presence is prominent. I remember being there. I never felt unsafe because every corner I looked, there was a law enforcement officer there ready to protect me. I mean, I've seen it personally, and in video after video, the response time for an Israeli police officer is seconds, not minutes.
With that
And
said,
that's
even
because they
Israel.
trust the law enforcement and they allow the law enforcement to do their jobs.
Right. But with that, I would say it's funny that you mentioned that, because the reality is that the percentage or the number of officers per capita is actually lower in Israel than it is here. It
Okay.
just, as you said, the presence on what those police officers actually do is different, right? We have an issue with law enforcement in America, specifically over the last few years, with them not being or not doing any proactive policing because of a lot of other social issues that came about, right? Numbers are dwindling of people that want to be cops. Cops' ends are restrained, so they don't want to do any true enforcement or protective, duties. In Israel, it's not like it. And then the other thing is, Israel actually historically would document and have videos upon videos that a lot of the terror incidents actually are stopped by legally armed civilians, and it's an ongoing debate in Israel whether to loosen some of these restrictive gun laws or not. For a period of time there, I want to say about 10 years ago, probably, Israel tried this thing where they wouldn't let soldiers to take their firearms home on the weekends. When I was in the military, we took it everywhere with us. We went home, and I always tell the story. I have vivid memories of me sitting in a movie theater on a weekend with an M4 between my legs, because I had to take it with me. But then they tried to stop it, and they realized that there were several incidents where these soldiers were in the vicinity of an incident and had no tools to address it because they were prohibited of taking the guns home with them. So that did not last long. It lasted for a few months, and then it was, I guess, reversed pretty quickly. But yeah, it's interesting how you, as a tourist in Israel, got that sense and that feeling, because it really does come a lot to perception and how these police officers actually position themselves and their duties. Did you know, for example, a police officer in Israel, um, here when you went into the police academy, you got up, you go to patrol, and then after a couple of years, you can try it out for certain specialized units, and there's a progression in Israel. When you become a police officer, whatever duty you pick, your police academy is actually going to be specific to that. If you're going
Oh,
to
wow.
pick patrol, you're going to be a patrol officer for your career. You're going to be a professional patrol
Yeah,
officer, but that is going to be your duty. If you're going to be a detective, right off of the academy, you're going to learn how to be a detective, and you're going to be a detective for the rest of your career. So when you see police officers patrolling in Israel, it's not just I'm trying to bide my time before I can make it into something better, quote unquote,
right.
right? Because we both know the importance of patrol officers, um, but they're taking it seriously. That is their job, And if you're a traffic police officer, that's what you're gonna do your whole career. I mean, you can do laterals at some point, um, but in theory, whatever you go to, that's what you do. So that perception and that sense of professionalism and duty is different than it is here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll go ahead going from that sense because I when it comes to the 2A debate, I think law enforcement has something to do with it as well, whether they can be there to protect you or not. So, and that'll bring me into these talking points real quick. These just some stats that I pulled out, and everything from I looked at mass stabbing attacks, defensive gun uses, gun laws as opposed to gun control laws, etc. So I'm going to start off with at least one third of the U.S. population, so that's over 100 million people, are afraid of going to quote unquote certain places because they don't believe and or trust that the government or law enforcement is able to protect them efficiently. Right? And this is according to a certain psychological association that did this study.
So I'm going to have you stop after each bullet point so we can discuss it, because I think
Yeah.
that's actually very important. And I said I don't want this to be about Israel, but let's
Oh,
actually bring that where every, let's talk about history. So Israel in 1978 had, I don't want to call it an active shooter, right? They had an incident that was a hostage situation where terrorists took over a school. We didn't have a true hostage rescue capability at the time. Our equivalent of the American Delta Force tried to make an entry. The whole operation was botched. We ended up with 23, I believe, dead kids. All terrorists were killed in the process as well, but it was obviously not a success. The next day, almost every school in Israel has an armed guard since the 1970s to today. I think there were a total of 3 shooting incidents at schools. You go to a mall in Israel, there's going to be a guard at the entrance. You go to a restaurant in
yes,
Israel, there's
there
going to be a guard.
is.
And I'll be honest, some of those guards are not very well trained. They're retirees, whatever. But it's a person with a gun. There's a lot to be said about deterrence, right? So again, when we talk about gun ownership, if I talk about 2 potential targets, one has a deterrence capability, be it a gun or something else, maybe just awareness, right? And the other one doesn't. Which one is my target, right? So
Right.
guns obviously can be used for evil, but they also can be used for good, right? So the fact they tell me that a third of the population is afraid of going to public places, right off the bat tells you that the issue is now with guns. The issue is with a criminal element that is allowed to do what they
And
want to do.
absolutely, and we're gonna get down to one of my last bullet points is accountability, right? Gun laws as opposed to gun control laws. So, a quick statistic, and the way it's defined, a mass shooting is 4 more people that were shot, whether they died or not. So that's a mass shooting, 4 more people, which is like every day in Baltimore, but whatever. So Baltimore has mass shootings every day, unfortunately. So 647 mass shootings in 2022, which again is defined as 4 or more people,
So that's 2 a day, mass shootings, nationally speaking.
nationally speaking, and 44,000 deaths contributed to a
These mass
shooting.
shootings.
Yeah, to mass
Oh,
shooting.
shooting in general, not necessarily mass shootings.
Yeah, shooting in
So
general.
does that include homicides?
This is homicides and whatever may be, accidental suicides.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because it's all shooting. But when you
So
compare vehicular deaths, all right, the same year, it was over 44. And again, I don't want it's apples and oranges, but again, people are passing legislation to sue gun manufacturers for somebody else's responsibility. But drunk drivers are killing people every day, and we're not suing vehicle manufacturers and putting restrictions on that. A drunk driver goes to court, and I'm speaking empirically. They take away his driver's license, but issue him a temporary driver's license, so they can go back out and do it again. But that being said, 42,338 vehicular deaths, all right, be it negligent or intentional. All right. So you're talking about a 2,000 difference. All right. Again, I'm not saying justifying anything here, but just comparing, there's a lot more out there. Right. Like get the facts out.
let's talk
Let's talk
about
about
one thing. So you talk about mass shootings, right? You said 600 and some for 2022,
it's
and
47,
you
give or
say
take.
everything. Yeah, and you said it's four people being
4 or
shot
more.
or more.
Well, even if it
But
was like, a gang related incident and they shot 4 people, that's a mass
exactly.
shooting.
Exactly. So that's the difference, right? Everybody likes to throw the term active shooter. First of all, we don't call it active shooter. You and I have discussed this in the past. We call it an active
Right.
assailant. I don't need a gun to do damage. You talked about
Nope.
vehicular
We're going to
assault,
talk
right?
about that too.
Yep. But I'll go for a wild incident in East France where a guy rammed a truck into a crowd
Right.
and killed 80 some people. We had that
Mhm.
in America as well, in one of the
Yep.
Carolinas. I can't remember north or south. Um, but the reality is that people like yelling active shooter, active shooter, active shooter. Where the reality is that many of these are not an active shooter, right? Let's define an active shooter for a second, right? Because there's 2 terms there: active assailant, right? Active means ongoing. And this
Correct.
is going to be important when you and I talk about police response in a minute. But active means ongoing, which means I am continuously shooting at people, right? Or harming people. If
Right.
I shoot a person and then stop, it's no longer an active shooter. Even if I shoot 4 people and I stop, it's no longer an active shooter. So the media has a role in publicizing these events and putting fear in people, when in reality a lot of these, not to justify the other shootings, but as we know,
Not at all.
it's not an active assailant. It is, let's
Right.
say, gang related. It's a homicide. There's a target in mind, right?
Right.
Um,
And before you continue, because I want to make that point, because like you said, we're not trying to justify anything. We made this comment before and we both agreed on it. If I had a choice, I wish guns never were invented, never existed. I wish that arquebus failed and they decided not to pursue it and nothing came of it. But that's not reality, right? It's just not reality. I hate the fact that they have to exist. I hate the fact of what they can do. Yes, they've been a sport. They're an icon. I'm a firearms not an enthusiast, but I respect them. I like to compete, etc. But I wish they never existed. Obviously, it's a
but they're
it's
here.
but they're here exactly, and we have to address it. And I think one of the biggest problems is disinformation and misinformation.
Right.
And we'll talk about that some more. So let me go to the next statistic so we can discuss. So this is from FBI database. All right. So I kind of broke it down. Most commonly used tools for homicides. Right. This is
Okay.
specifically homicides. All right.
So defining
So
homicide, there's a specific target in mind. I'm not going randomly killing people, right?
right.
An
So
active assailant.
whether it didn't specify if it was like intentional or negligent or anything like that. Just homicides. A homicide's a homicide,
Right,
right?
but again, just so our listeners understand, because you and I understand terminology, but some of our listeners are
Mhm.
not. They don't come from the tactical war per se. In an active assailant incident, there is no specific target. These
Correct.
people that go to
Correct.
school or go to a workplace, they just want to kill as many people as
Yeah.
possible.
Mass
When we talk
casualty.
about right, when we talk about homicide, there's a target. There may be additional casualties associated, but there was a target in mind. I was going after a
Right. Whether
specific
it
person
started
or
with a
group.
different crime or that was the initial crime to begin with.
Right.
So FBI statistics again, 13,000. So firearms top the list, which can be expected. But a total was 13 plus, give or take, firearms. And of that 13,000, and I say this specifically because again, I'm not opposed to some kind of gun, platform to control people buying firearms, background checks, etc. But again, we're pushing to ban weapons that are not commonly used, right? In crimes. It's just a political game. This is why I say, proper and actual functional laws would be great, not what they're trying to pass now. So out of that 13,360 were rifles. All right. And I'm not talking about the AR-15s, although they fell in that 360. We're talking about any rifle, whether it was an M1 Garand or whatever it may be. So it's
Yeah, hunting
360.
rifles, shotguns.
Correct. And the rest were handguns, right,
Right.
used in these crimes. Right. Again, this is total homicides. Now, this is funny. The next one down is other blunt objects, which was it or other objects from poison to hammers to sticks, whatever it may be. That was the next one down and commonly used for homicides. Knives follow that, right? So it's like about 1,400 plus homicides. And last but not least, bare hands and feet, which was roughly around 600. Right.
Oh.
So just to break down that FBI statistic right there.
And I'll be interested in finding out what are those statistics in countries that have stricter gun laws. So let's talk about England, right, where legal private gun ownership is very limited. And I remember reading a statistics that after legislation's been passed, yeah, obviously homicides with guns went down because there were less of them, but homicides using other objects as sticks, pipes, and
Right.
knives skyrocketed. So you're
And
not
it's
fixing the problem,
no,
right?
right. You're not fixing it. You're just ripping the band-aid off of one wound and putting it on the other.
Exactly. And we always say, and we're going to get back to this as we go through this podcast, but I always say it's not about the tool, it's about the evil mind of people, right? Person that
Correct.
intends to do harm, he's going to do harm. They'll find whatever means to do so, whether it be a gun, an explosive, a car, a knife, or bare hands, right? You cannot stop people from doing what they want to do if they have that intent.
Right. So thank you for bringing that up because that brings me to the next, right? Again, we can't the apples to oranges. We're not comparing America to other countries, right? But I wanted to bring up some other countries, and I picked out some with some of the strictest gun laws, right? And I'm starting with Japan. Although they don't necessarily can compare with these other countries specifically for a reason that we'll talk about. But Japan has extremely strict gun laws. You're only, I believe it's only two types of firearms you can get, both shotguns. You have to have a reason to have that shotgun, pass aptitude tests, psychological exams, pay a specific fee yearly, and have your gun inspected by law enforcement yearly. All right, that's it. One. But the reason that when you ask what the statistics showed when they asked citizens, citizens didn't feel they had a need for them. Why? Because this kind of goes back what we talked about in Israel. The law enforcement is allowed to protect them. It's abundant, it's prevalent, and they quickly stop and quell crime, right? And there's a big respect for the community and elderly population, right? The unit of the family. So their crime rate's really low, so they don't feel they have a need for them. They exist, and the government allows them to exist restrictively. But the difference is they trust the law enforcement because they can do their jobs.
So I'm going to stop you and I'm going to throw something because it's and I know we're going on tangents, but I knew that's going to be the nature of this conversation, going on different
That's good.
directions. We're so opinionated about it. But you talk about Japan having some strict guidance or guidelines to get firearms, right?
Right.
And you mentioned a second ago that you're not opposed to certain background checks and so forth. So I want
Which
to
already exist.
Right. And I do want to point out our personal opinions. I mean, I think it's important
Right.
for our listeners and viewers to hear them. So I'm going to share mine. I'm obviously a pro Second Amendment. I have a lot of firearms. I enjoy shooting. I teach. I do not want to give any of that up. I also am a big believer in training and education. Right.
Amen.
I think someone that's going to own a firearm, specifically if they intend to using it in self-defense, should go for significant training, not just this is how a gun works, but some realistic stress inoculation, have them go for some training that will prepare them for such encounter, right? I'm not opposed to a background check for criminal and mental health background. Now, this is a slippery slope, and this is where we got to be careful what we say and how we say it, right? And I really tried to get a friend of ours who's an attorney that specializes in this case, because articulation is important. But
Absolutely.
and we'll have him on a future podcast. But the reality is that where do you draw the line, and
Right.
what constitutes a mental health issue that bans someone from owning a firearm, and what doesn't, right? So if you talk about a veteran population, right, a lot of them have some baggage that they're carrying, right?
Yep.
Does that constitute a mental health issue, and should they not be carrying a handgun or any firearm? And I said no. I mean, that's probably the person I would trust the most with a firearm.
Right.
But when you fill up, at least in Maryland, when you fill up the paperwork to buy a firearm or to apply for any permit, there are questions in the application about you ever
Mental health.
being treated, you being ever in an institution, voluntarily or not, and you need to provide letters and so forth. So you gotta be careful on that. But I do believe that someone has to be of a sound mental
Right.
health, physical health as well. Go through the training, no criminal background. I'm perfectly fine with all of that. But if I meet all those objectives or all those checkpoints, then nobody should stop me from buying a firearm, restrict how many I have, how many rounds I have in the magazine,
Yep.
or so forth. I
And
showed
I agree.
that, I showed I'm capable and able and have the common sense to affect a decision-making process if I ever need to. So that is my stance, at least.
Yeah, and absolutely. And I think the point I was trying to make, I misconstrued with you too. I agree with you 100%. I was trying to make the emphasis that if you restrict law enforcement, like people aren't going to trust them, etc. Give them the power to do what they do. You're going to have a little more peace. But even with that, even if we had some of the best, law enforcement's able to do their jobs in the world, agree with you 100%. I should still have the right to be able to defend myself because it doesn't matter how well the police do their jobs. They, like as we said before, they are reactive, and we can both speak on that.
Yep.
It's in over
So
20
let's.
years. I rarely was there at the right place at the right time.
So you were a police officer in a large metropolitan department, one of the big seven in Maryland, right? Let me ask you this: how long is average police response time to a real emergent call, right? So we're not talking to somebody dinged my car. Talking, you hear shots fire, you put lights and sirens on, you pull in code, How how fast is your response time?
I mean, it can vary anywhere. I
Give
mean,
me best case scenario.
a minute,
Okay, a
a
minute.
minute to two,
Right.
right?
Perfect. A minute. I'm a
I
police officer. Sorry.
Yeah, go
Go ahead.
ahead. No, I was going to tell you in a certain area when I was a supervisor on midnights, I was literally less than a mile away from a shooting when the call came out. It took me 5+ minutes between getting the call, getting situated, getting there, establishing perimeters and doing what we got to do. I mean, the assailants were gone. We found the crime scene. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Um, but it took a minute.
Yeah.
It took a minute, and I was less
But
than a mile away.
I'm a police officer in a rural environment. My response, depending on what side of the jurisdiction I'm at, may be up to 15 minutes. Right.
Right.
So that's a significant amount of time. We did a little ad hoc test at a healthcare system that we work with. There was an event that went on the ED. I just happened to be there when that was going on. The police precinct is literally across the street. I'm not gonna name the agency.
Yep.
Literally across the street. They called 911, and because I was there, I'm like, let me start the stopwatch. It took them over 7 minutes to get there, literally by foot. If they were just crossing the road, they would be there faster. Um, so
Well,
again, talking about legal gun ownership, if if there's something going on at my workplace, at my school, my kid's school, at my home, do I sit there and just take it for anywhere from 1 minute, best case scenario by you, 15 minutes, best case scenario by me, or do I respond? And I think the answer is pretty obvious.
Oh yeah.
We-
Oh yeah. And again, I can speak empirically. Three times in my law enforcement career, I was what's the word I'm looking for here? Assisted by a 2A, legally wielding patriot, who was willing to
Yep.
step up and help me when I was alone. And
And
I'm
you were
grateful.
lucky because nowadays they're going to get sued by somebody,
Yeah.
probably your own agency. I'm
I
not naming your agency, any police
yeah,
agency for that
yeah.
matter. If I'm a police
Yeah,
officer,
I've had 2A members catch and grab perps that were running from me, and I'm grateful for it. I'm thankful for it. A law-abiding, well-trained 2A carrying member. Like you said, unfortunately, that's what's going to stop the bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I
yep.
don't care what your
And we
argument is.
right, we say it as a mantra, and I think people take it out of context. We again, I can't stress enough. We think that you said it as well, a well trained individual, right? Someone that knows what they do and when to do it and how to do it. It's important, but those people will respond to an event better and quicker than any police officer will. You and I
Mhm.
have been training law enforcement for the majority of our careers by now, most of our lives, right?
Right.
For me, starting in the 1990s, right? So we're talking 30 years of training law enforcement and military. And I will be the first one to say they are poorly trained. They are
Mhm.
minimally trained. I don't want to say poorly. They are minimally trained. There are standards they have to meet, a qualification course of fire. They have to pass a test. Nobody teach them actually how to respond to a high stress situation in a realistic environment, short of very, I would say, selected individual within the agency. We'll say SWAT teams and so forth, right? We'll talk about SWAT response in a second, but most officers, the vast majority, are not trained enough. And I would say the average law abiding gun owner likely goes to the range, attends classes, and is better trained than most police officers we know. I would argue that. Um,
And I would agree with it, geographically speaking, because
yep,
obviously smaller agencies are going to suffer worse than bigger agencies.
yep. And you know what? We I just mentioned SWAT team, so let's talk about that for a quick second. Your agency, I don't want to pick on your agency, so I'll say where I used to live, not where I live right now, but where I used to live, one of the other big seven in Maryland,
Hmm.
their SWAT team said on one side of a major highway, a beltway, right? And I lived on the other side. If they got a call and they went full lights and siren with no traffic, which is never happening, right? It would still take them every bit of 20 minutes to get to the site before they can even formulate a plan and go in and address it. So 20 minutes of being a sitting duck waiting for the SWAT team. So you and I know that if we're talking about a true active ongoing incident, the first responder is not going to be a SWAT officer. It's going to be the
No,
patrol officer.
no, and I think you're being very, very kind with that 20 minute, because on average it was an hour with me.
Right. Well, we're also talking. I was talking ideal scenario, right? You and
Right.
I know the belt where you would take, try. You know what? I see it less with police, but certainly a lot with the ambulance. Whenever I ride or drive the medic unit, if I turn the lights and sirens on, it's like everybody pulls right in front of you. So
Oh yeah.
if I have to come from the other side of town, and even lights and sirens during traffic and so forth, it would take every bit of an hour to get to where I'm trying to go, no doubt. Um, so talking about the training that the patrol officer receives, um, it is it is minimal. It is minimal. My average law-abiding citizen that takes our classes is a better shooter, better at decision making than most police officers I train.
I won't disagree with that. I won't.
and and I don't want to criticize police officers. They are our brothers. They trying to do a hard work. They're limited by their agencies and their bureaucracy. Um, I just read you a comment today of an officer that attended a class, and he was saying that he went back to the range and tried to do what we taught him, and the instructor says, "You can't do that here." And he goes, "Then why the f did you send me to this training?" So obviously they appreciate the training because they know the value, but then their hands are tied and they can't use it. Well, so what's the point?
Right. And it is unfortunate. But like you said, it's every administration is different, every state is different, laws change all the time. Um, I still believe, in law enforcement, your primary job, as it's written in any annotated code, is the preservation of life. But it's very hard to do that when they're tying your hand, when they're taking away your life-saving tools. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And it's unfortunate, because there are many men and women who really want to do the job, but they're human beings, and I think that's one of the things they forget. And they have livelihoods, and they don't want to ruin that. But
Yeah.
let's stay on track. I got a couple more statistics for you to debate. These are the stabbing
Let's see.
attacks on countries, right? And I focus on your typical countries. So China, for example, firearms are completely illegal to own, but they have the largest cases of mass stabbing attacks, right? Brazil is another one, very restrictive gun laws, extremely exorbitant crime rate. They average 10,000 knife homicides a year, right? 10,000 knife
What's their
homicides a year.
population though total?
Yeah, I mean, per capita, yeah, it kind of averages out with the population because it's so big, but still, that's a lot of knife
So,
attacks.
but it shows you that gun control doesn't really solve the issue, right? I believe Latin America does not allow military caliber firearms, so they can't have 9 millimeter, for example, but they can have 380,
Yeah,
which is a
it's
9 millimeter
it's
short.
very, very restrictive. South Africa, although they're not, they have a pretty open. I won't say open. They have permitting processes. They limit the number of firearms you have and the amount of ammunition you can own. They do that, but again, extremely high crime rate, close to 10,000 knife homicides a year. Um, like you said, if you're skullduggerous, have nefarious intentions, you're gonna do harm any way you want. Um, so India was one I looked at randomly. I literally just randomly picked India, and they do have strict gun laws, although they have permitting process. But it was funny in India, 90% of the homicides are committed using illegal guns. So I thought that was an interesting statistic when I looked up India, and they roughly have 9,000 knife homicides a year. Um,
You know what?
Go
Let
ahead.
me start for a second. Talk about illegal gun ownership. Let's talk about markets. Because at the end of the day, dollars and cents do matter, right? If we restrict legal gun ownership, what would that do to the market of illegal guns? Right. So the criminal element will always be able to get their hands on guns. I don't care how many
Right.
laws and rules you put. You've seen it. I've seen it. We arrest people and they have guns on there. They don't buy them at a shop. They
Yeah.
the Glock that costs at the shop $600 will sell in the black market, out the back of a van for $4,000 to $5,000.
Oh yeah.
But you can get them. Um, you can manufacture them. I just heard in Israel a big issue, since we talked about Israel, is a rifle called the Carlo, which is based off the old Carl Gustav. Essentially, these Palestinians are making the terror organizations because they can make it from pipes and scrap metal. It's really inexpensive, and you have an operating, functioning firearm, right? So you're not gonna stop the ownership of firearms. You're gonna stop
Right.
legal ownership of firearms. That's what's important for people to understand. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of people miss that point when I debate it with someone. I'm like, okay, so you're gonna prohibit myself or you, from carrying a gun, but who's stopping the bad guy from carrying a gun? The bad guy is
No.
about to commit homicide anyway. Does he care that he's carrying a gun illegally? So, I think people. I always say people lack common sense, but it's still bizarre to me that they don't
Right, but
understand
this goes back
logic.
to the misinformation and disinformation, right? I had a healthy debate which turned unhealthy about AR bans, specifically the 5.56 round, right? 5.56 2 through 3. Very common round. And this person was debating me saying, "Oh, you don't need that for hunting, you don't this and that." Blah, blah. I'm not actually. I have used it for hunting. I've used it for hunting boar and different animals, and I'm like, "Do you even know what a 5.56 looks like? Because you're really debating the fact that it's this weapon of war. Yes, it is a platform used in war, but like it's this evil thing." He goes, "Well, they should be banned." I'm like, "So you're going to force me to buy larger caliber rounds if you ban this one? What does that mean?" That's his question. So I literally had to show him size comparisons and basically say a 5.56 is this a 22 caliber in diameter round. I'm like, it's a commonly used round, and it's just so this misinformation, disinformation. Nobody knows what they're talking about. So many people think AR stands for assault rifle, and it doesn't. We all know it stands for Armalite. And that's the problem. If you're going to debate it, educate yourself on it, understand what it is, where it comes from, what it's for, etc.
But
And,
if you go
and that's
from an AR-15 to an AR-10, you're certainly safer.
oh, absolutely. I told that in this debate. I'm like, okay, so you want to take my AR-15? I said, I guess I'll have to just buy an AR-10. And like, what's that? I'm like,
It's
so
it's five it's five safer. That's what you need to tell them. It's five safer, and I just
yeah,
shoot some bigger round, but don't worry about it.
it's
That's funny. But I guess you bring the term weapon of war, right? And
right.
and I
And that's been thrown around politically significantly, that term,
but I'm trying to wrap my head around what is not a weapon of war.
right? If you drive a Jeep, you're driving a weapon of war.
Right. My knife, my spork, you know, uh people killed with anything out there with a baseball bat. It
Listen,
is
I still
all,
have MREs. When I eat them, I'm eating a weapon of war because what
yeah,
comes out after you eat it is definitely biological,
it's
nuclear, and
killing.
chemical.
Yeah, it's lethal. Yeah, no, but people, you one of can speak 100% correct in naming disinformation and misinformation in the fact that people are being fed the wrong data, and they don't
Oh
know any
yes,
better.
absolutely.
And when you listen to some of these legislators that are trying to pass laws, and you look at them describing a firearm, and you're like, what the hell are you talking about?
So
I mean,
so
you
so
don't
I'm gonna stop you real quick because I want to get this out before I forget because you said
go
the
for it.
misinformation, disinformation, right? So let me talk about defensive gun use because was not put out, right? This is not, and I'll call them out. Heritage.org list all the legal 2A valid self-defense situations that have happened, and they're pretty significant listed on there. And that's not all of them; it's just the big ones that really stand out. But that aside, all right. So approximately 500,000 people are victimized annually in the United States, and out of that, 70,040 have successfully protected themselves with a firearm. All right. According to another national study, on average, right, Americans use a gun for self-defense, and this is a conservative number, 2.1 to 2.5 million times a year, right? And that's either firing it or displaying it. Again, these are reported,
So
right?
hold
I
on.
mean,
So we have six
reported,
hundred. We have 647 shootings that are, well, let's say for the point of right now, illegal or malicious intent. Right. We have 647 of those, but we have 2.5 million.
million,
Right. Positive life-saving incidents annually.
correct.
So people want to ban legal gun ownership and they're going to stop 2.5 millions
And
to
again,
prevent,
that's what's reported.
right, to
That
prevent,
doesn't count. I'm not going to
to,
bother calling the cops because I already took care of the problem.
right, but I'm saying they're going to stop, they're going to try to prevent these 2.5 million positive interactions, right? I'm saying positive in the sense that people saved their lives or protected themselves or others, to, in theory, prevent these 600 incidents, which are carried by criminals anyways, which where the gun laws are not going to be affecting them anyways. And that is the disconnect that people don't understand. Right.
And
So
and just to emphasize that, because you said, the way you finished it, right? That brings me to one of my last research, open source research. Some of the open source research I did, which was, this is where I kept saying gun accountability laws versus gun control laws. Because unfortunately, there's not an accountability. When I first started in law enforcement and you committed a crime, that crime changed the penalties for it based on the fact whether you were empty handed, had a knife, or a gun. Obviously, if you had a gun, it was first degree, etc. It was the worst of the worst. Now you see people being arrested with firearms, illegal firearms at that, and they're walking right out of the courthouses. They're not being held on bond. They're not being held accountable. And what do? They go right back out and do it again. And this is a reoccurring problem we see in Baltimore,
yep.
and in other major cities. And that's a big problem.
I remember vividly a case a couple of years ago where a shooting in Baltimore where the shooter, the killer, because this was a homicide, was released from jail 3 days prior for a illegal gun ownership or gun violation, right? And this wasn't his first time going in for that. Every time he's being released because the judicial system is trying to be so liberal and so, we're gonna try to rehabilitate him. We're just gonna give him another chance. He's not really mean. And this guy end up thanking society by killing another person. Um, and I've seen it myself once where I arrested an individual, and 2 days later, I saw that same individual on the street, and I had to arrest him again for the same exact offense of illegal gun ownership. But he was released both times by a judge that essentially said, "This is not something that's important to me," and that is absurd. So people want to introduce more and more laws where the laws we have already are not enforced. So what's the point? You know.
And again, that's where this debate can go down the rabbit hole, right? We can talk about accountability laws, the judiciary system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? They all are supposed to work synonymously. Unfortunately, in certain states, they work against each other. And
Right.
that's a problem when it comes to the 2A community, right? Because now you're turning the law abiding citizen into a criminal,
Exactly.
and it's unfortunate.
We're looking at a few legislations locally and federally right now that may affect some things. So, New York already tried to pass it. I think it's already being challenged. Maryland is going to try to introduce it where, because they couldn't prevent legal carrying permitting, they're trying to
Can't carry
minimize,
law.
yeah, where you can carry. So you can't carry in any assembly area. So restaurants, movie theaters, all of those are going to be considered public places, and you can't carry a gun in those. um I'll bring an incident that you and I talked about that happened roughly a year ago now in Indiana, where there was a shooting going on at the mall, and this individual went to intervene. He ended up shooting and uh, killing the suspect, and the event ended up with 3 fatalities instead of potentially allow more if a legal gun owner wasn't to um, introduce his own weapon to the equation in a sense, right? So, or to challenge the shooter. So the idea is that that person, and by the way, there was an attempt, if I understand correctly, to sue this individual, the guy that responded, because the mall had a no guns allowed policy. Being that this was in Indiana, it was knocked down pretty quickly. But think about it this way: if Maryland passes such laws, and all these people that now have concealed carry permits because it got a huge boost over the past few months, right? And if this passes, all these people now cannot legally carry in these places. What are we accomplishing? We're essentially telling all these law-abiding citizens he can carry a gun, while the bad guys, they don't
They're
give a
gonna catch
shit.
up. And
Yeah,
you know what? I was waiting pretty much to the end, which I know we're wrapping up anyway. I want to share this quote from a Marine, right? This is from Lieutenant Colonel Jeff Cooper, and he couldn't have said it better. If violent crime is to be curbed, it is only the intended victim who can do it. The felon does not fear the police, and he fears neither judge nor jury. Therefore, what he must be taught to fear are his victims. I mean,
100%.
you, you can't sum it
Personal.
up.
No, I love Jeff Cooper. Jeff Cooper, for those that don't know, is very largely considered the father of modern firearms, specifically pistol training in
Mhm.
America. He started a place called Gunsight, I believe, in Arizona. He passed away a few years back. The place is still ran, I understand, by his widow. I've never been there. I hear nothing but good things, though. So I take a lot of things that he says to heart. He trained a lot of people, from professional law enforcement and warriors to civilians.
Mhm.
Um, so I love that quote, and personal accountability is key. And you alluded to it at the very beginning of the podcast, but I'm gonna put it in a sentence that you and I use very often. Police is minutes away when seconds count, right? So if I cannot count on police, as we discussed, because they're too far above police officers, and we understand that we have a job and we're gonna do it to the best of our ability. Um, but there's limitations to the job. We're reactive, we're responsive, we're far away. It's going to take us some time to get there and respond appropriately, right? We can't take ownership of any issue that society is facing, and people have to start taking their personal responsibility to hand, specifically when it comes to safety and security, right?
Mhm.
So if you, as a civilian, find yourself in an active assailant event, right? We're going to stick to active assailant for the moment. What are some tips? Because I always like finishing with giving our audience some tools that they can use, right? So, what are some things that um, you would recommend people to invest time and energy into that would enhance their survivability in such incidents?
I mean, it's training, 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 right? You know, we said that in the beginning. If you're going to take on the responsibility of carrying a firearm, right? One, you got to decide what is your intention of carrying that firearm? Is it defensive, offensive? Is it both? And start training for it. You got to make yourself efficient.
I would add to that if you make the decision to carry a firearm, you should carry a firearm at all times. It shouldn't be a matter of convenience, right? Okay, so today I'm gonna wear a suit and I'm gonna go out to a fancy restaurant, so I'm not gonna wear my gun. No, because you know what? If that's the night that something happens, how bad would you feel? How much would you hate life for the rest of your life if you knew you could have done something and you didn't because you were lazy, right?
Right.
So if you can legally carry, carry. I would say invest in some medical training as well. I think,
Absolutely.
I mean, we
Absolutely.
both EMTs and we're big on trauma care, but if there's a shooting going on, people got injured. Might be you, maybe a loved one, maybe the bad guy. It doesn't matter. Um, it's just the logical thing to do. Get some medical training. Um, I would say be proactive. Not being preventive in nature is always better than being reactive in nature. Situational awareness. Don't put yourself in bad situations. Do your homework before you go anywhere. Um, there's a lot of discussion about this run, hide, fight that became a big mantra in America since the early
Mhm.
2000s. And not to knock it down, it was a solution that most people liked because it was easy to remember. I feel it's not easy enough though. You and I discussed this in length a couple of years ago, and I remember the conversation very vividly. But we both said that an active assailant stops shooting at random people when they get challenged, whatever that is, by whoever that is, whether being a police officer or civilian. So what we started teaching as a result to most people is forget about run, hide, fight. Just run. Just try to get out any direction that you can go, even if it's towards the assailant, because the reality is that will mess up that assailant's OODA loop and hopefully get him to stop shooting at other people. Um,
Right.
there's no solution that's going to get you zero casualties, but there are solutions that we believe that will get you less casualties. And we did this test. I want to share this with the listeners. We did it at a hospital we trained. We ran the same scenario twice, same bad guy, but we used different role players. In one event, we different role players in the sense of uh, the innocent bystanders, right? The shooter was the same role player, and in one event, we told them, you're going to follow run, hide, fight. To the best of your ability, do whatever you believe is right. Should you run? Should you hide? Should you fight? In the second one, we just told them to run. And we were using simulation, so we could see hits on people. We could see whether those hits would potentially be fatal or not, right? And some of it is subjective, and so forth. But still, and we realized that when we told people to run, in average, we had 50% less casualties. Um, it's simpler for people to remember. It's simpler for them to employ under stress, and it certainly messes with the shooter's mindset a lot more. So that's what we teach. I mean, we keep it as simple as possible. Forget about run, I fight. Just run. Just get out. Do whatever you need to do. Get out. Um, if you have a gun, even better. Engage a shooter. Um, so I agree with you.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. Again, I hate having to talk to this about my kids in their own school, as I know you do as well. But that's the reality. I don't care how much you oppose guns. The reality is they're here. They're not going to go away. So lift up and appreciate the people that are making the conscious decision to carry one to protect themselves and you, if necessary, that cannot protect themselves. You know what I mean? I've always been a firm believer of, I'm going to die standing up, not kneeling down. But again, that's a mindset, right? That's how we lived our entire lives. Not everyone has that. Train, 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 not just your mind, body, or not just your body, but your mind as well. It
Yep.
runs with those scenarios because you just never know if it's going to happen. And you know me, I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it.
Um,
Yes.
yes, I'm gonna bring it all together and kind of tie it up with what we started this podcast and talking about comparing America and Israel. And again, I cannot stress enough, this is not, we're not trying to compare apples and oranges, because bringing it to
Or
what
cherry
you just said
tomatoes.
about, what was that?
Or cherry tomatoes.
I'm or cherry tomatoes, but I'm just trying to emphasize the whole point about mindset that you just brought up, right? So physical skills aside, mindset is key. And when we teach active assailant response to organization corporations, we showcase two events that happen from a timeline standpoint pretty close to each other with very, very distinct differences. One of them was a shooting at the Pulse Club in Orlando,
No.
where this shooter went in, and that is a terrorism incident. So I don't like roping it into active shooters, because there is there's an ideological target behind it, but that ended up with 52 fatalities and hundreds of casualties, right? Which means that I don't care what firearm you have and what's your magazine capacity. You can have 100-round drum on an AR, and you're still gonna have to do multiple reloads, right? So there would be laws in the fire, which nobody ever capitalized on. We compare that to an event that happened in Tel Aviv, Israel, where two terrorists went into a coffee house or restaurant with submachine guns, and we end up with three fatalities. I believe two of them from gunshots and one from a cardiac arrest, and that is it. And the difference was that the populace, the people, the patrons of the restaurant in Israel, ended up engaging those shooters. Again,
I
mindset,
saw.
because they were not armed. They picked up chairs, tables, whatever they had, and they attacked the attackers, right? And that is a mindset thing. So tools or no tools, to your point, okay, it comes down to training, preparing yourself mentally, emotionally, physically, to take on the fight. Because at the end of the day, you don't choose the fight chooses you.
Right. And, and just to give credit to the brave man in California, the last shooting incident wasn't an individual who engaged the shooter and took him down, and that's what stopped the mass killing. It was
Yep.
engagement from a good guy,
And
period.
something in Texas recently, right? When we had the school shooting, the person that ended up engaging was actually a parent. Now, granted, he was a tactical operator from a very specialized
Yes.
unit, but he didn't respond as a police officer. He responded as a parent that heard that something was going on, and he was going there to intervene. And even he was in awe in the fact that, why is police not doing anything? And he ended up
Mhm.
going in.
Yep.
Um, so a lot of credit for those that do choose to carry firearms. We and I think I speak for both of us. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think as silver savages, we certainly need to encourage legal gun ownership. We need to encourage training as a paramount part of it. Learn how to use it properly. Decision making. I can't stress that enough. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with your firearm. Learn weapon retention so you don't lose that firearm to either accidentally or purposely. Take medical classes. Learn the data. Learn how to debate it or discuss it knowledgeably, intellectually, politely, and respectfully. I talk to people that are a lot more liberal than I am. Often, I don't try to get lured into a fight. I present the information to the best of my knowledge. I'm open to discussion. Nobody has swayed me from my ways yet. And I think I was able to convince a few people to the fact that all of us gun owners are not mass killers. And there's a lot of us, or the majority of us, are good human beings trying to do a good thing for a good reason, hoping that we never have to.
Yep. Yep. And like you said, we're silver savages, right? We got older for a reason, and I think now it's our duty to protect those behind us so that they can reach that silver savage status themselves. So that responsible gun ownership, training, knife, whatever, it's our duty to pave the way, because eventually our time will come and they're gonna have to take over.
Well, I hope that time comes a little bit later than in the near future.
So
But
do I. I'll tell you what, I've been there, done that, and if the Lord doesn't take me away right now, I'd probably just say, "Hell yeah, it was a good ride." So,
it certainly was a good ride, but I don't think my ride is over just yet.
no,
I
no,
want I want
I got
another
it.
ride.
I still got another quarter. I'm riding the ride.
So I
Send
say
me
I
the
want one more ride.
yeah, send me the roller coaster. I'm ready to go.
All right, Steve. Well, thank you for doing the research on those statistics. I think that was very helpful, and I hope our listeners got some good idea. I know as these topics typically go, that we probably didn't convince anybody that didn't want to get convinced to
No,
begin with.
and that's
But
okay. That's okay.
exactly. Our goal was to present our opinion, but b some as objective as possible data, and as you oftentimes say, empirically speaking, we are talking from experience, whether in Israel or here, as law enforcement, military, and law-abiding gun carrying civilians. Um, sharing that information with our audience, and hopefully it resonates.
Yep. Like I said, and I'll throw it out there. My whole life, I've leaned to one side. My life experiences pushed me to the other side and brought me back right in the middle. So I'm always open to discuss, to debate healthily. I don't judge anyone. We all believe what we believe because there's ambiguous stimuli that makes us believe it, and most of that is empirical.
It's amazing how many of our legal gun owners are not this, you know, um, the stereotypical persona that the
Yeah.
liberals are trying to portray, right? We just aggressive gun toting. It's all about. It's not. It's not. We do believe in reason. We do believe in logic, and we do believe in having the tools to do what we need to do when we need to do it. Because at the end of the day, it's about us. Uh,
Amen. And knowing
thank
is half the battle. Yo, Joe.
thank you, Steve, for your time, and I'll see you tomorrow at the office.
Hopefully.
All right, brother. Have a good night, buddy.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this latest episode. Please go ahead, like our podcast, and subscribe. Check out our YouTube channel and follow us on other social media channels.